and welcome to Soul Talk with Rabbi David Aaron and Leora Mandel. Rabbi Aaron, unfortunately in life, sometimes there's challenges that don't go away. There's challenges that are phases we go through. They're a challenge, limited time period. It's a time in passing. And a person might need strength, obviously, to go through the challenge, grow through the challenge, ideally. But sometimes we get stuck in challenges that won't change. Maybe a person has a health situation that now this is a new reality for them that they need to adjust to. As we all know, you can't change somebody else, and sometimes a person realizes that people in their life have made certain decisions, and this is who they are. These are the decisions they made. There's consequences to them. They affect me. I can't change that other person, meaning there can be different life situations that a person feels almost stuck. This won't change. This person won't change. The situation won't change. And my question is what would be advice or guidelines for someone in a situation that they feel could easily make them unhappy, get stuck, so to speak, because the situation won't change? What can one do to still find joy and happiness in life when faced with a situation that could easily bring a person down, that will not change, and yet still find a way to be happy?
Right. Well, one of the definitely a great and important question. When the situation won't change, then you have to change. You have to change your mind. We have to understand that there's the event and then there's our interpretation of the event. And I want to share, I've many times shared because I think it's a very wise saying that it'd be better that we would speak to ourselves more than listen to ourselves. When we listen to ourselves, there's a certain inner chatter that can easily go very negative and very pessimistic and very much in the direction of despair. We have to take control of that mic and decide to say positive, empowering things to ourselves. And quite frankly, a person without faith, I don't know what they would say to themselves. A person of faith, during the holiday of Sukkot, which we just had recently, we said Hallel many times, praising God, and there's a verse in there, Hodu la Hashem ki tov ki le'olam chazdo. Thank Hashem, thank God who is good, because his kindness is forever. And I thought about that and I contemplated that and I realized that maybe one of the messages is to understand that God's kindness is a kindness that's set forever. Sometimes somebody can do a kindness for you and it lasts for a year, it lasts for 2 years, but it might not be a kindness with a forecast or with the foresight towards the best in your interest for your foreverness. And when a person is facing a situation that's very painful and doesn't seem to change, then I have to change my narrative and somehow convince myself that if I can't find exactly what it is, but somewhere in this situation is an opportunity for growth.
Hmm.
Somewhere in this situation is God's kindness, which right now is a total mystery to me, and maybe even might feel totally ridiculous that this could be some kind of kindness. What I try to do is remind myself of the infinite wisdom that runs this universe. It's just that there's a fabulous saying from Isaac Newton. He said, I would need no more proof that there is a God than looking at my thumb. My thumb is the greatest proof. And if it's just your thumb, what about your hands? And what about your eyeballs? And what about your eardrums? And when you just take some time to be mindful of how infinitely wise the universe is designed, then I think it's reasonable to assume, and I think it's ultimately our responsibility to choose to give ourselves a narration that somehow there is wisdom running all this. The infinite wise creator knows what he's doing. I might not know what he's doing. I often don't. But I need to remind myself that there's some kind of opportunity here. And what has to change is my attitude.
Hmm. What's so interesting about what you're saying as I'm thinking about it, I think one of the reasons we can get so stuck in these kinds of situations is because of how we think about the situation, as you're pointing out. But the way we think about it is this won't change, this won't change, this won't change, this is forever, I can't do anything. All these disempowering thoughts, no wonder we feel disempowered. But what you're saying is we can choose what we're going to focus on. If I'm focusing on all the things I can't change, which disempower me and make me feel stuck, as opposed to, as you're saying, not focusing on what I can't change, but focusing on what I can change within the situation, which ultimately in any situation, the only thing I can change is me. But the more I could think about, do I feel like this is destroyed me, or do I feel like there's some opportunity here? Let me see what I can find, how I can find it. What can I do? Where's my attitude? Meaning, as you're pointing out, it's a very different focus. One is getting stuck, and the other is finding a new path within where my life has taken a different direction because of this situation.
Right. I think so much of it has to do with our expectations. Somehow we've convinced ourselves that the world is an amusement park, and we've come here to have fun and ride the rides. But I've come to realize, in my life that this world is a gym, and we're here to work out and build muscles, in this case, build character, strength. And so much, it says in our tradition, "Hakol b'dei Shemaim chutz miyirat Shemaim," all is by the hands of God, other than our reverence of God. So our really reverence is an attitude. Do I have reverence of God and God's wisdom, and am willing to accept? I mean, much of what makes the pain painful, or even more painful, is my resistance to accepting that it is what it is, and somehow being insistent that it must change. Now, it might change. You might say, well, this will never change, but it might change. But you got to work on the attitude of, but it also might not change. But what can change, and might be very difficult to do, is I have to change my attitude, and I change my narrative. And I could say all kinds of things to myself that, make me feel, and I've shared this before for sure, but I have a friend who's had one of the most difficult situations, life situations I've ever heard. And I asked my friend, here, this is your choice. Either the universe is a big accident, what you're going through has zero meaning, and it's going nowhere, and it came from nowhere, and we're in a universe that is chaotic. So when you choose to think that thought, how does that make you feel? And he said, well, I feel devastated by that narrative. I said, okay, look, you could choose to believe that what's happening here is in fact from God, and that he hates your guts and he enjoys torturing you. If you think that thought, how does that make you feel? He says, oh my gosh, I wouldn't be able to get out of bed. I'd be so devastated and so depressed. So, oh, you could choose to believe that God has created this world and has decided that he wants to go do something else and has abandoned this world, and we're on a airplane without a pilot. And when you think that thought, how's that make you feel? Says, oh my gosh, it stresses me out enormously. And say, okay, or you could choose to believe that the world is created, that there is an infinite, source of wisdom, and that everything is being guided with infinite wisdom, with an eye for the future of the future of the forever for yourself. And that even if you don't know the meaning of what you're facing, there is meaning there, and there is opportunity here. And someday, sometime, you will discover what that's about. How does that make you feel? And he said, well, that gives me hope. I said, okay, look, I didn't prove there's a God. I'm not trying to prove there's a God. I'm just demonstrating that what you choose to believe is determining the quality of your life experience, and choose wisely and responsibly, because it's your life and you want to make a choice that you can live with.
Hmm. I think everything you're bringing up is making me realize I need to clarify a question that I think sometimes can be challenging. Is, on the one hand, if a person's going through a challenging time, clearly from God, for example, a health situation that had nothing to do with anybody else, but there can be the struggle of needing to accept God sent this to me, and now applying everything you're saying, what's the narrative I'm going to say around it? But I think sometimes when something happens to a person that comes from another human being, for example, I'm trying to think, a person's cheated in business, and now all their finances, all their life savings is gone. So there can be a lot of anger towards the other person, but meaning what you're sharing here is part of giving meaning and purpose to some of these struggles, is recognizing there's a God who's running the world. So in both cases, one is directly, clearly, this is God sent this to the person. The other, there was like a human being that made a choice that then led to a consequence that affected me. But would the still the mind space of in terms of trying to find some meaning and purpose, and even in that situation, still be, but God's still running the show. And if this happened to me, it's just as
Yes.
much from God as the health situation that's seen more directly from God.
Absolutely. Going back to that saying of the sages, Hakol b'dei Shemayim chutz miyirat Shemayim, all is by the hands of God except reverence. That means that consequences are completely determined by God. Our choice is our choice, but what that's manifest and resultant by our choice, that's in the hand of God. If a person comes up with the best plan to undermine another person, the best plans could be foiled by circumstances. So if a person, God forbid, chooses to shoot somebody, well, that's their choice. They could pull the trigger and the trigger, gets jammed. There might not be a bullet in the gun. The bullet might have been a dud. The victim might have moved. There are infinite possibilities that could happen after the person made the choice to pull the trigger, but it's not in their hands to actually pull the trigger.
Hmm.
That's already up to God. So, we have to understand there's my business, your business, and God's business. God's in the business of results. We're in the business of the choices. And if God decides that our choice is going to reach the intended result, that was God's choice. Um, and you've now become a vehicle for that. But you made the choice to do that, but it's up to God whether that'll actually get done.
Hmm. So then on the receiving end, anything that I go through, I need to skip, so to speak, the middleman, go to the source, and realize there's a God in this picture. If I, as you said before, expectations, life is a gym. This is not the workout I maybe would have chosen for myself, but God's sending it to me. And I think what you said before about finding meaning, when we can, instead of feeling stuck in a situation, being able to find meaning. But again, these pieces are all crucial in it, because that means any circumstance I go through, even if
Right.
there's a middleman, God's in this picture, and there's some reason this is happening to me. And I need to work on my mind space of finding the meaning and realizing there is growth here.
Right. That doesn't mean you absolve the person of their responsibility and say, well, if they damage my car, then well, God allowed that to happen, so somehow my car needed to get damaged, and so I'm not going to take them to court. No, this person is responsible for that, and you can take them to court. But in terms of in your heart, how to accept what happens, it feels like if this person would have not have made this choice, this never would have happened, and there's no meaning to this. It's not part of God's divine plan. But everything that happens, if it happened, it's somehow part of God's plan. And there's a mystery here in Judaism. When we look into the future, it's an open field, total free choice. When we look into the past, it's God's plan. And Judaism is describing a paradoxical way how, on one hand, there is a plan and yet there is free choice. It says this in Pirkei Avot, in the chapters of our fathers. Hakol tzafui v'reshut netunah. All is foreseen by the divine, and yet you have the permission to make choices.
Hmm.
Very difficult idea. It's very paradoxical. But in terms of, it's actually a very healthy attitude in terms of handling the challenges that we're in. By, on one hand, I'm not letting the guy off the hook and say, well, he had nothing to do with it. Yeah, he did. He was the vehicle. He chose to be the vehicle for that. And I'm going to hold him responsible. But for me to go around thinking like everything would have been different had this person not chosen to do this, no, if it happened, then there's a meaning to that happening, there's a purpose to that happening, and somehow, someday, we'll see that there was actually, in the midst of it all, some kind of kindness coming out of it.
Wow. So I would definitely say that when something happens to us in life that we feel we can't change, and we need to start the process of accepting and thinking of where do I need to change so I can. I would say it's a journey towards joy again. I don't imagine this is something that just the thought instantly brings a person to saying, well, I can still have a happy life. But the foundation of that journey is recognizing God is in this picture. There has to be some meaning to this. Where can I find the opportunity, or where am I maybe now needing to change so that I can become maybe maybe this is it, the person I was before might not be able to handle this or might feel stuck or could live with resentment. But now I need to become a new version of me that can, in spite of the fact that this is a situation that I can't change, I can still live with joy and happiness. But I need to now be almost become the new person that will be able to do that. And part of that journey starts with what you're talking about.
Well, I would add to that that I think we have sometimes a distorted understanding of what joy and happiness is. Joy
Mm,
and happiness is I'm singing, I'm smiling, I'm laughing. Sometimes that's not how joy and happiness is manifest. Joy and happiness can be a deep sense in your heart that what's happening is what has to happen, what's good for me, an opportunity for growing, and I feel a happiness in my heart, but I'm not laughing. When my parents passed away, I was devastated, and I remember one night during what's called the Shiva, the period, the 7 day period of mourning, people come to comfort the mourner. I was lying in bed, and I said to myself, I feel so sad, and yet in my heart I feel very happy that I feel sad. Because how sad would that be if I didn't know how to express sadness? I was very grateful that Jewish tradition has created a context for me to, as an outlet for my mourning. And so I felt a happiness in my mourning. What I think is really depressing is when you're happy when you should be sad. And I actually think that very often depression is really people who are in denial of their sadness rather than embrace your sadness, look for the growth in the sadness, and find a kind of joy that you are in touch with reality. And so I think it's important to understand that happiness doesn't necessarily mean you're smiling or laughing or dancing or singing. It might be a very deep sense of connectivity that I'm in the program, I'm with the program, and since I know that God is running the program, it's going to be okay.
hmm.
Even more than that, it's going to be amazing.
This is an attitude I'm realizing if we can take into all aspects of our life. Here we're applying it to usually what would be painful situations, but it brings a sense of meaning and purpose to any situation we're going through. And a person can really integrate this, and I guess we'd never be in any kind of situation where, so to speak, we do feel stuck. I mean, I think processing through a situation definitely, if there's a process, but if the foundation of how I live my life is recognizing, and as you're saying, you don't know how a person without faith can do this, which now I'm really understanding what you're talking about, because the foundation of this is recognizing is God brings situations to my life that are for my growth, and there's a purpose to them, and there's meaning to them, and and as you were saying, expectations of what is joy. I think that was actually a very powerful point too, because sometimes I might think I can never be happy, but with how do we define happy with your definition of happiness that really goes hand in hand with understanding the foundation towards it is recognizing God brings situations in our life that create growth opportunities. That is joy, just knowing. It's interesting, as you were saying with the Shiva, because I'm thinking in a situation like this, a person can be struggling and happy at the same time. And I think sometimes we think that you can't have both at the same time, but the way you're explaining it, you actually can.
Yeah.
So maybe that's part of the person can almost, I think when we think we just can't, we close the door. But if I say I can hold both, I can be struggling with this situation right now because it's new or because I recognize I need to make some changes in how I think about it or whatever it might be. But I can also, in a different hand, hold the idea of I can still find joy because the joy in this definition is there can be some purpose here.
Not only there can be purpose, there is
There
purpose.
is
It's just
purpose.
not something that I might have been able to identify or articulate. And and it could be something revealed to me a long time away. There's a story about a rabbi that lived a very, very long life, and his students said, "What is the secret to your longevity?" And he said, "I never asked questions of the Lord." And they said, "What do you mean by that?" He says, "Well, when people have all these questions of God and his ways, God says, well, if you want an answer, come on up. I'll give you
Mm,
an answer." But I didn't ask any questions, so God has left me here, and I'm okay. I'm patiently going to wait for those answers that I'll only be able to get in the next world.
mm. So, I mean, there's so many, I would say, life changing perspectives that you're sharing with us here. But I think that ultimately, for all of us, whether we're in the moment of a situation where we are feeling stuck or just it's an attitude we have to and a perspective we have to integrate into our life because everyone goes through times like this where we can feel like stuck. But there is no stuck if we live with the perspective of everything I'm going through is from God. There's some purpose, there's some meaning. This is the meaning of my life. Maybe part of the expectation is I thought things would go one direction and God's giving me a message. No, your life is now taking a different route. But recognizing that it all has meaning and purpose is ultimately what enables us to live our lives with joy no matter what is going on. I want to thank you all for joining us. Soul Talk, Rabbi David Aaron and Leora Mandel.
Shalom.